It's from the Haas School, and it's my pleasure and delight to be meeting with you to talk about the subject near to my heart, which is what I call dynamic capabilities and related paradigms. This is the first time I've done an online class, so hopefully it'll go smoothly. My plan is to talk a little bit, and then about every 5 to 10 minutes I'll break and take questions. And what I thought I would do today is just say a few things about the course, and then actually jump into the deep end of the swimming pool by actually giving you the heart of this concept of dynamic capabilities, which is what the whole course is about. But take you to the heart first, and then build on out from there so you understand the bits and pieces a little better. I could have gone the other way where I could and end up pulling it together, but I figured it's better pedagogically if I can start with a top-level view, picture view of what this is all about. But let me just, as soon as my technical support person comes in, I'll pause for a moment just to see if there's any questions about organization that you must get off your chest before I start. But my plan is, and I've given you a slide deck that I plan to walk through, and that should take us through most of the 2 to 2.5 hours that we have available today. So let me just pause for a moment to see if there's any burning questions anybody has. And if not, if so, I'll deal with them. If not, I'll jump right into the substance, with your permission, of course. So let me just pause, and this will be a good check for us. Ian Lees is my teaching assistant, and I put him in charge of the difficult stuff, which is the technical side of it. I've got the easy stuff, which is the substance of the course. So let me just pause for a minute to see if anybody has a burning question that they need to get out before I continue. Let me pause. Any question? Any hands up? I don't see any hands. I'll take that as the fact that you're already impatient with the late start, and I'll jump right in. So, what is this dynamic capabilities big idea all about? Well, it's fundamentally about how you get to build companies and how you keep them great long term. Of course, it's a very big question. It's a fundamental question of the whole field of strategic management. How do you build great companies and keep them competitive long term? And you know it's a big question because there's very few companies that stay competitive long term. So you know it's not an easy problem. If we know the answers to this question, or if we've got some better idea about how to navigate through these issues, we're not only going to be better as managers, we're going to be better as investors. And we're also going to make better public policy. So this class, unlike some other classes you may have had, which twiddle around the edges of narrow technical questions, this goes for the big kahuna. This is what you come to business school for, basically, is to learn how to build and sustain competitive advantage at the level of the business enterprise. And the only reason why nobody else touches this problem or this issue head on is because it's too big a problem. But every business school should have this as front and center of what the MBA curriculum is about. But sadly, it's not. But for this class, it is. So we can all feel comfortable, or we can at least take some comfort from the fact that we're going to address this fundamental question today. First slide, please, Ian. Okay, I don't see any slides yet. Ian, you can hear me, correct? There we go. That's just reminding you this is a Haas School, but also reminding you that I'm also the founder and executive chairman of the Berkeley Research Group, which is an off-campus professional services company here, and also the Berkeley Research Group Institute, which is a 501c3 not-for-profit. That's who I am. I've been on the Berkeley faculty since 1982. I was hired a year after Janet Yellen joined our faculty. and I'm still on the faculty because no one's offered me a big job in Washington, and no one's anointed me as the CEO of anything big. So anything that I've ended up running, I've had to build myself. Next slide, please. Okay, so we're going to go to the foundations of dynamic capabilities, and next slide will give you a little bit of intellectual history of the field. Intellectual history matters. One thing that amazes me is when managers are making decisions and when managers are talking about the state of their company and the state of the world, and when they're talking about ideas about how you build business, one way or the other, reflecting not just their own experiences, but things I've learned from others. And actually, increasingly over the past 75 years, what they've learned in business schools. So I've gone back to the 60s and thought about the field of strategic management. And if you go back to the 60s, there was no field of strategic management. That most business organizations had a planning department. That's where they thought they did this thing called strategy. Of course, strategy, as you will learn and as you already know, really belongs in the office of the CEO. But it unquestionably is assisted by people throughout the organization. But in the old days, we talked about planning, and it was not just financial planning, it was strategic planning. No one talks about strategic planning today, and you should ask yourself, why not? And I think the answer is, in part, because the world has changed so much, there's so much uncertainty that plans, that are made today have got to be thrown away tomorrow because there's so much deep uncertainty and change. So the world is nowhere near as stable as it was from an economic and business point of view, in part because of globalization and in part because of increasing technological change. So the planning department went away, but then in the mid-'80s, my good friend Michael Porter at the Harvard Business School came out with a framework called the 5 Forces Framework, which you probably all heard about. And at Harvard, there are courses that are very, very popular called industry analysis, and that's what Michael taught for many years. And a paradigm of competition was propagated that, quite frankly, was wrong at the time it was initiated, and is definitely wrong today in terms of being incomplete and missing a lot of the key elements of competition, the main one being innovation. Even back then in the 80s, you could not build, in my view, a framework to understand competition unless it had innovation at its very core. The 5 Forces Framework, which every MBA from Harvard has, and some of you may have suffered in one way or the other, has that very static framework. That said, it's a starting point for looking at industries. If you define the competitive domain as being industries, you'll walk away from this class, I hope, believing there's no such thing as an industry anymore. That industry boundaries have always been blurred, but they're so blurred today that it's meaningless and a trap to think about industries. So we'll take away more of the language of ecosystems than the language of industries. But anyway, 5 Forces was the next big thing. And I would say probably 60% of the students around the world that take a course in strategic management spend most of their time on a framework which is, in my view, was out of date at the time it was propagated in the 80s and is actually likely to lead you astray today in major ways. Then in the 90s, in the academic literature, this notion of a resource-based view of competitive advantage came up. Whereas with 5 Forces, the whole idea was to find a good industry. Michael Porter's paradigm says, look, there's good industries. A good industry, from his point of view, is one with high barriers to entry. Of course, that's good if you're on the inside, bad if you're on the outside. But an attractive industry was one where you were shielded from the forces of competition. The resource-based approach said, well, it doesn't matter if you're shielded by entry barriers, because there's probably going to be some people on the same side of the fence as you are. And really what matters is the unique resources that you have, be they intangible assets, be they, you know, a unique piece of real estate, be it some intellectual property of some kind. And the resource-based approach was an effort to put the firm back into the center of the study of strategy. But it was also inadequate because it was also static. It never asked the question, well, what's a scarce resource? Where do these things called scarce resources come from? So that's why at Berkeley in the late 80s and early 90s, we developed this framework called dynamic capabilities. And since you're all Berkeleyites, you're either in the program, and I understand we have many alums, let me just tell you, dynamic capabilities has taken at least the idea world by storm and is now the dominant paradigm in the field of strategic management. I say that in terms of if you look at the academic literature, but also if you look at practice, that's where the buzz is today. But it's not a neat little framework. It's not a set of recipes like 5 forces. So it's not propagated as far into practice because it's harder. We teach the hard stuff at Berkeley. If you want an easy course on strategy that's wrong, you go to the Harvard Business School. If you want a difficult, complex course that you'll spend the rest of your career trying to figure out what the heck the professor was really saying, you bite into dynamic capabilities, and that will be your friend and your ally and your helper throughout your career. And you'll beat all those guys with Harvard degrees because they have got yesterday's industrial model in their head. You have today's knowledge economy in your head, which is no big surprise since we're located on the West Coast, you know, right on the edge of Silicon Valley. And it's just natural that we would think of a framework where there's innovation, where there is change, where there are ecosystems, where there's ambiguity, where there's uncertainty, and where we don't plan because we know there's no point in planning. Not to say we don't have a financial plans, but the business plan was thrown out the window 20 years ago because we know that a business plan, as soon as the ink is dry, is no longer fit for purpose. Not to say you may not want to do a plan every now and again, but one should recognize that a business plan half-life is very, very short, particularly in industries where there's rapid change. So it's good to know that a lot of the people, not only the people that got Harvard degrees, but the people that are actually in the media and a lot of other people on Wall Street are really operating with the 5 forces framework. And so it's your chance with your Berkeley degree to outsmart them because you have a little bit of the secret sauce that you got to get from this class called dynamic capabilities. Well, there's obviously a little bit of hubris in what I'm saying, but I'll ask you again at the end of the class whether you think that hubris is justified, and hopefully you'll be kind enough to me to say, yes, it is. Next slide, please, Ian. All right. Now, you've been in the MBA program here at Berkeley for a while, but I doubt in any textbook you've seen the word capabilities. But I'm sure that you've used the word capabilities in everyday speech, not just to talk about the capabilities of individuals, but to talk about the capabilities of organizations. Well, the capabilities of government departments, for that matter, and nation states. I'm sure you've talked about the fact that some people in some organizations have low capabilities and others have high capabilities. But guess what? There's nothing in the textbook about capabilities. At least there's nothing until we got this dynamic capabilities program going. And that's awfully strange. Why is it? Why is it the capabilities, which we all know are important? Our mothers and fathers told us capabilities are important. We know that capabilities are important. We read from people that have not got MBA degrees that capabilities matter. We know in the military that capabilities matter in warfare. We sort of know that they matter in business, but why isn't there a book on capabilities in a business school? Well, the reason for that is because us economists, in my first degree, in fact, my only legitimate PhD, is in economics. We took capabilities out of the economics textbooks because we assumed that to make the models work, we assumed that all firms had the same capabilities, they had the same cost structure, you know, the model of perfect competition, the same cost structure, or, you know, maybe we said that some firms were more efficient than others, but we didn't bother to ask why they were more efficient. We didn't bother to delve into this question of capability. So we were intellectually blindsided and we've ignored capabilities, not because they're unimportant, but because we don't have any intellectual frameworks and structures to talk about them. And that's why I had to invent dynamic capabilities. But notwithstanding that, in recent years, some people, including economists, have gotten wise and start to recognize and talk about capabilities. So here I've got a statement from John Sutton, who's a very distinguished mainstream economist at the London School of Economics. Look at that first statement. The proximate cause of differences in the wealth of nations lies, for the most part, in the capabilities of firms, not the balance sheets of firms, not the IP of firms, not the identity of the founder, but the capabilities of firms. And I agree 100%. So if this is true, shouldn't we be studying the capabilities of firms? Of course we should, and you've all recognized that, and that's why you've signed up for this class. But there's no other class that we offer at Haas on capabilities. And you go to other business schools, I don't think there's any classes on capabilities either. Where I'm going is the second bullet point, that I think I can persuade you that firms with strong, what I call dynamic capabilities, are the ones that end up with higher productivity, higher wages, faster growth, higher profits, and greater long-term survival. So what we need is a capabilities framework. That's what I'm going to develop for you in this class. And with the next slide, I'm going to jump into the deep end. Please, Ian, next slide. Here's a definition. Perhaps the reason why this is the definition, there's a fellow called Teece here and another fellow called Pisano and a lady called Amy Schuin, two graduate students at Berkeley, two PhD students, Pisano and Schuin. I was their advisors. We came up with this definition, which has taken over and become the definition of dynamic capabilities. So it's the ability of an organization and its management to, guess what, integrate, build, and reconfigure not just what's inside the organization, not just what's inside the firm, not just what's internal, but what's internal and external in the way of competences. So it recognizes the importance of alliances, it recognizes the importance of joint ventures, it recognizes the importance of customer relationships, it recognizes the importance of supplier relationships to address rapidly changing environments. So if you're in an industry where there's no change, you can leave this class. There's nothing that I'm going to teach you that's going to be useful. But if you're in the middle of Silicon Valley, or if you're anywhere that's not shielded from global competition, or the forces of innovation, or pandemics, or political disruption, you need to be in this class. Needless to say, you're all here for the good reasons. And the goal of this class is to create a framework to help us understand how we both create and sustain long-term competitive advantage of the enterprise. Now, you know, I could teach this at the level of the individual. I'd have to bone up a lot more on human psychology, or I could teach it at the level of the nation state. I wanted to bone up a little bit more on the dysfunction of government organizations, and I am. But on this, for the meantime, and for the next several years, I'm focusing on the business enterprise, because the business enterprise is the heart of the economy, the heart of the capitalist system. It's what we need to keep our economy moving forward and keep our society moving forward. So the problems are big enough. I'm going to stay focused, and delighted to have you as companions to stay focused on the business organization. and the business enterprise. Next, please, Ian. All right. You know, I talked about this concept of dynamic capabilities for 15 years, and people were intrigued and constantly confused. I found that there was suddenly clarity when I talked not about what dynamic capabilities are, but about what they're not. And that led me to begin talking more fluently about ordinary capabilities. So we're bifurcating, you know, think of your Venn diagrams here, we're bifurcating capabilities into two groups, dynamic and ordinary. And you know, you're going to hear me almost poo-poo ordinary capabilities, but I don't mean to. I just mean to keep you focused on dynamic capabilities. But we always in the background have to remember that it's important to have ordinary capabilities too. These could be specialized and proprietary, like if I have a better process for, you know, the Toyota system of production is an ordinary capability in one sense, but it's sufficiently specialized. It took people a long time, including General Motors and others. It took them 15 to 20 years to figure out how to implement it. So some ordinary capabilities are specialized and proprietary, and some are generic. And those generic ones you can learn in business schools, and you can learn in engineering schools. You go to school and you learn ordinary capabilities of a generic kind. You may learn just a tad that's specialized, but you know, most specialized and proprietary ordinary capabilities are developed inside organizations. The reason why I de-emphasize ordinary capabilities is because sooner or later, every corporation that's in an industry will figure them out. This is the world of best practices. And now I'm going to say something which is a bit heretical too. Beware of best practices. The problem with best practices is you can't build competitive advantage with them. They're necessary, but not sufficient. They're necessary because somebody else is going to have best practices too, so you better have them. But to the extent to which they're imitable, to the extent to which they're replicable, to the extent to which that other competitors have them too, you can't use it to build a point of difference. So you have to use it to stay alive, but you can't use it to build a point of difference. So its competitive significance is diminished on account of that. And remember, this class is about how to build and maintain long-term competitive advantage. And so I'm not going to be beating the drum as loud on ordinary capabilities as I am on dynamic capabilities. The real special secret sauce for greatness is dynamic capabilities. This is necessary stuff. This is sort of table stakes. To get to play at Vegas, you got to have table stakes, and table stakes are ordinary capabilities. But the good news is that if you don't have them, you can buy them. Dynamic capabilities, you can't buy them. You got to self-taught, and you can get a lift from other people, but basically they're self-taught. So that's the key distinction here. This class is about dynamic capabilities, but always in the background, we're going to have ordinary capabilities. And when you start to read the literature, you'll see that people constantly confuse between ordinary and dynamic. But the competitive significance of dynamic, as I've already pointed out, is dramatically different and greater and higher than ordinary capabilities. So hopefully by the time you've done this class, you'll be able to read the confusion that's out there and take some satisfaction from the fact that you understand the difference. If you don't by the end of this class, you can blame me and apply to Haas for a refund for your tuition. I'm not saying you'll get it, but you deserve it if you don't understand the difference and you've come to, if you've taken this class and been diligent about it. Well, next, please, Ian, and we may be almost at a pause point here, but let's see what the next slide is. Yeah, let me just do this next slide before I pause. And this next slide is actually a new one I've created because I realized that I was throwing too much cold water on ordinary capabilities because a lot of companies don't have any dynamic capabilities and they limp along with ordinary capabilities of a special kind, and you can get by, and you look okay. Like let's take let's take Honda. It's got strong ordinary capabilities. In fact, it's got some very specific ones. That's what enabled it to build the Honda jet, and that for Honda is a big change. And they have a chance there of maybe getting out in front, because there's some specific ordinary capabilities that they have that other people don't have. But building the Honda jet is not necessarily going to take them to Mars, which is where Elon Musk is going. But it's a small step toward moving into a different playpen, and with some small points of difference from other companies that are in the executive jet business. Let's take Google. It's clearly got great capabilities in advanced computer science. So does Carnegie Mellon. So does UC Berkeley. So does MIT. It's not those capabilities per se that are going to cause Google to win in the marketplace. Certainly an enabler, but they don't guarantee, unless those capabilities are deployed at the right time in the right place, doesn't guarantee competitive success. So this is a diagram to say, yes, there are some special things out there. These are ordinary capabilities with a star around them. They're special ordinary capabilities or signature ordinary capabilities, but it's not the stuff of this class. Next slide, please, Ian. I'll get through this one and then I'll pause for a while. So here, let me say that dynamic capabilities is about doing the right things. This is a very simple language, whereas ordinary capabilities are mainly about doing things right. And this is such a simple distinction in the English language, but think what a powerful distinction this is. And think about what efficiency is all about. Efficiency is getting to best practice, and that's pretty much an ordinary capability. It'll keep you standing still and busy, but you can't build greatness from efficiency alone. You build greatness off of innovation, figuring out what the next big thing is and doing the next big thing and having property rights over the next big thing. So this class is about how do you figure out what the right things are to do? And I'm going to submit to you that is harder to figure out and to position yourself for than figuring out how to do things right. If you want to do things right, you can go to business school, you can hire a consultant, you can do all the things around cutting costs and so forth, and all of you can go into a company and probably find ways to improve its efficiency. But there's only a few of you that can go into a company and strengthen its dynamic capabilities. That's right now. By the end of this class, I'm hoping that all of you will be able to go into a company and know what to do to strengthen their dynamic capabilities, to keep them focused on doing the right things, placing their bets for the future in the right place, and pulling up their bets from the past and becoming ambidextrous. So that's what it's all about. And let me pause there and see if we have any questions, and let's hope the technology is working well enough. Let's see if we have any questions before we roll forward. So let us pause. And Ian, do we have any hands up yet?
I don't see any. You should be able to unmute yourself, we hope, should you have a question. You can also put it in the chat if you prefer.
I have a question.
Okay, go ahead, and if you could introduce yourself, name and company and brief background.
Sure. Hi, Professor. My name is Raju Kankipati. I'm a Senior Director for Business Management at Maycom Technologies. We are a semiconductor company with a lot of semiconductor ICs, lasers, photodiodes, mostly in the telecom and datacom markets. So my question is, a great class, by the way, I'm excited. So my question is, will you be covering how to discover the dynamic capabilities and ordinary capabilities my company might already have before I get started, or before we get started on how to build more of these capabilities?
Yeah, I hope so. I will give you some of the hallmarks of companies with strong dynamic capabilities and companies with weak dynamic capabilities. So to warn you up front, there is no rule book. The reason why everybody loves Michael Porter's 5 Forces is a cookbook. You know, here's your laundry list of things. My laundry list is a bit more ambiguous, but I think, yes, you will, if you don't have a keener sense, if 2 classes in, you're not getting a keener sense of what constitutes your ordinary and what constitutes your dynamic, then stop the class. And, well, I say, give me 3 classes, perhaps. If 3 classes in, you're not feeling like you're seeing the forest from the trees, then it's time to stop the train and look at them. So, yep, the goal is to get where you need to be, but I can't guarantee you it's going to have crisp edges on it.
Great, thank you.
All right, and Professor Teece, next question from Regina. Is there a benefit to the 5-year plans that many companies have teams working on?
Well, there's some benefit, but I tell you, my good friend Dick Ramel, who's strategy prof at UCLA, says that in his view, what happened is too many companies have come to believe that their financial plan is their strategy. And they get so focused on the financial plan that are not asking the fundamental questions in an organized way. And, you know, I can tell you, there's a very large Fortune 50 company in Silicon Valley where I had the privilege for 2 years of being the mentor to the CEO. And I was shocked to find that there was lots of discussions around the financial plan. There was no discussions around strategy. That company, by the way, now, and I put a red flag on it, that company now is really struggling. So there is some benefit from financial planning, but not if it's the expense of figuring out your future and strengthening your dynamic capabilities and making sure that you're positioned well for the future. And the problem is, it's not the problem that the problem is not that the plan is in and of itself wrong or bad. Is that it becomes a distraction and becomes a substitution for the more difficult stuff that you need to do. So that's a very good question that was asked. Take a look at Dick Ramel's book, Good Strategy, Bad Strategy, because he goes into this in a little more detail. Is there another question, Ian?
Let's see, any other questions at this point? Just to unmute yourself if you have one. Well, let me take the liberty. Professor Teece, would you be able to, and I know you'll cover this later, quickly name 1 or 2 companies that you think particularly exemplify good dynamic capabilities, or ones that have failed for not doing that?
Well, I think ones that have failed in recent years are, you know, the Kodaks and the IBMs and so forth. But, you know, my favorites, I will jump to kind of a conclusion which will help establish the problem. My favorites, you know, Apple under Steve Jobs, and still Apple has got some reasonable dynamic capability. Jeff Bezos, Steve Jobs, Elon Musk, Reed Hastings. These are my heroes. These are people that have got dynamic capabilities in their blood. And more importantly, they're able to lead their organizations in the style of dynamic capabilities. And the reason they can is because they own a good chunk of the stock. I mean, the sad part of all of this is our current systems of governance and the role of activist shareholders are enemies, often, not always, but they're often enemies of dynamic capabilities, because the shareholder rights people, the so-called shareholder rights people, are in there pushing for, quote, efficiencies. You know, the shareholder rights people are proxies for ordinary capabilities. Please improve your ordinary capabilities. Improve your ordinary capabilities, please. And, you know, you can do that and you get a better performance for the next 2 quarters, but worse performance for the next 20 years, if that's all you focus on. So the challenge is to, yes, I'm not saying efficiency doesn't matter, but it's not the key. Innovation is the key, and there's a tension between innovation and efficiency. Listen, if you want to make an organization more efficient, I don't have to hire the brightest people from Haas. But if I want to make an organization more innovative and have stronger dynamic capabilities, I have to hire the stronger students from Haas. And that includes every one of you, at least by the time you're through this class. So while it's not just limited to a few companies, it is easier when I believe you have the entrepreneurial mentality of the founder continues post the founder. And, you know, Apple does that to some extent. That entrepreneurial mentality, of course, big companies, it's hard to maintain it. But some do maintain it as they get larger. But it's only when the leadership is vigilant that's going to happen. And they've got to be not just vigilant, they've got to stare down many forces that are going to force you to look like everybody else and to cut costs and to be more efficient. So that's my friend Charles O'Reilly, who is at Stanford. He calls it ambidexterity. And ambidexterity is kind of a special case of dynamic capabilities. You'll hear me talk about ambidexterity as a related paradigm. And there's a number of us observers that are saying the same thing, but not me that's saying it. By the time you get through today, you'll find some great quotes from people in Silicon Valley that are very consistent with dynamic capabilities. So thank you for the softball, Ian. And let's move on to the next slide.
There we go.
All right. So this is how I like to tease people. What I've got here is ordinary capabilities and dynamic capabilities. So you could position a company according to the strength of their ordinary capabilities and the strength of their dynamic capabilities. And, you know, in some environments, it's more critical to have strong dynamic capabilities than others. And if you look at this chart, it says if you're in turbulent environments, that's where you need strong dynamic capabilities. And if you're in stable environments, that's where you can maybe get by with strong ordinary capabilities. And if you're in the middle, you know, just sort of normal risk, then you need some of each. So companies with strong dynamic capabilities or strong capabilities are out on that frontier, and companies that are towards the 0 point where the two axes come together, they are the weak companies, they are the poorly managed companies. But, you know, if you ask people, you know, are you in a stable environment? Well, if there's anybody in the class that is working for a company or has worked for a company or desires to work for a company in a stable environment, I'd be surprised because there's not too many of them out there. But there are a few. If you've got some protection with a government franchise, if you're protected by regulation or something like that, and things are very stable, yeah, you can get by with reasonable ordinary capabilities. But if you're in turbulent environments, and you know, today, not just with innovation, but with globalization marching forward and backward and forward and backward at the same time, and with political disruption at the same time, I don't think there's a lot of disagreement that the better characterization of environments today is turbulent. So if you still want to teach the 5 forces stuff, yes, it's relevant for somebody, and I can't find the name of a company, maybe you can help me, a company that sheltered from competition, sheltered from innovation, and sheltered from political disruption. If you're in that sheltered circumstance, then just staying reasonably efficient will give you long-term sustainability. All right, next slide, please. So how can we characterize the environment we're in? I love this quote from Bill Janway, who's a venture capitalist. He's a thoughtful one. He says, the innovation economy is saturated with unquantifiable deep uncertainty. So look, we will know this. The economy is saturated with uncertainty, but if you ask yourself how much of the stuff you've learned at Haas is really, suited for environments saturated with deep uncertainty. How much did you learn in accounting? How much did you learn in management science? How much did you learn in marketing? How much did you learn in public policy that really assumed that the real world was saturated with deep uncertainty? I would say most of what we teach assumes a high degree of stability. And so we don't equip people as well as we should for the real world that is out there, and particularly here on the West Coast, where Silicon Valley is so important, although Silicon Valley is moving to Texas unless California changes its policies towards taxation and many other things, that we're out here in the tech world. We know that uncertainty and the unknown unknowns is the norm. Next, please, Ian. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about this world of deep uncertainty. Of course, there are professionals that have operated in these environments for a long time, and that's the military. And in fact, it's not surprising. The field of strategy didn't come from business schools. It actually originated with the military. That's where the first strategists came from, whether it's Sun Tzu in China or others in the West. Strategy really came first from the military because it's in the field of battle that you face this environment that the U.S. military from the 60s on called VUCA. V for volatile, U for uncertain, C for complex, and A for ambiguous. So making decisions, think about the courses you've had in management science and decision theory. How many of those courses are about decision making with its VUCA, with its volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity? Most of the tools that we teach you in business school or in engineering school are really not suited for the world of VUCA. And it's okay to have those tools. I'm not saying that was a wasted exercise, but what I see is people applying those tools, like net present value, for the world of deep uncertainty. I was sitting outside the boardroom of a major automobile company a few years ago, and the company was given the decision to make multi-billion-dollar investments in autonomous vehicles. And someone came out of the boardroom and says, "Help me, the board wants to know what the net present value of this $5 billion they're going to spend is." I said, "Go back in and tell them it's a stupid question to ask. No one knows the answer. You can't calculate an NPV on something which, where the environment is characterized by VUCA. Those standard ways of thinking about things and making investment decisions just are not applicable." But the fact that a major company board was asking those questions and that management was apologetic that they didn't know the answer, to me underscores the problem. Management should not have been apologetic. Of course, management's always reluctant to give a lecture to the board unless you're somebody like me or Elon Musk. But then occasionally boards will chop their heads off of managers that speak back to boards. But that's the nature of the world. So we've crafted dynamic capabilities to help guide decision making in the world of VUCA. And then I say that the Porter's 5 forces, the Harvard approach, and other strategic management frameworks are not relevant when there is deep uncertainty, and that pandemics and geopolitical rifts are amplifying deep uncertainty. So every year I teach this course, it becomes more relevant, not because I'm getting better, but because there's a larger and larger group of people that understand that the world they're living in is a VUCA world, not just because of Donald Trump, but because of the rise of China and because of innovation and because of lots of other things. Next slide, please, Ian. So, as I said before, the military strategists, of course, get to these issues way before us academics because they live in the real world and we don't. And so I've actually got some quotes up here that come from military strategists. In fact, it's this from Navy Captain William Lesher on taking risks. And what he says is that our growing ranks of disciplined risk-taking leaders will be one of our most critical and enduring warfighting advantages. And he says, in a security environment in which seeing far ahead is increasingly difficult, that's the fog of war. If you're in the fog, you can't see very far ahead. A premium accrues to force attributes of adaptability, flexibility, and speed of response. And then an important qualifier is distinguishing between calculated risk-taking designed to achieve an objective, which is good, and operational and personal conduct errors, which is punishable. So there's, we're not saying here that all risk-taking is good. And this is a hard thing. And the military is teaching us what the difference is. It's okay to fail if it's because you took a calculated risk designed to achieve an objective. That failure is okay. But if you made basic operational or personal conduct errors, that's not okay. That's punishable. And these are very important distinctions. I haven't seen them in any business school textbook. So, when the business school textbooks don't say anything, turn to the military. They've dealt with management. Remember, the military, in the past, armies were way bigger than corporations. It's no longer true. Corporations are now bigger than armies. But armies and churches used to be the largest organizations. Now it's governments that are the largest organizations, corporations that are the second largest, the military is sort of maybe the third and fourth largest, and the church is very small. But a lot of experience with managing large organizations comes from the military because they were big before the Pennsylvania Railroad became big. And even today, they're ahead of us. They're smart people that actually have to operate in the fog of war, and it's no longer just dollars and cents that are at risk, it's human lives that are at risk. So we're damn lucky that we got smart people, often smarter than us business people, that are leading our military. Next, please. So here we go. Here's a spectrum ranging from risk on the left to uncertainty on the right. Now, just to be clear, with risk, you can put a probability on it. So things like, earthquakes, things like recessions, that's not uncertainty. That's risk. When there's a probability distribution that you can put on something because it's been seen before, that's risk. On the far right is uncertainty. You can't buy insurance for uncertainty. You can only buy insurance for risk. Uncertainty is about the unknown unknowns, the so-called, what Taleb calls black swans. I'll tell a joke on myself. As some of you may know, my other passport's from New Zealand, and when I came to America, it took a long time before anyone started talking about black swans, and I couldn't understand what it was all about. And then I realized they were talking about very rare events, that in North America, black swans are very rare. Well, there's one country in the world where there are no white swans and everything's black, and that's New Zealand for some reason. I don't know why. But anyway, I've had to turn my mind inside out and upside down to realize that when I'm talking about black swans, I've got to zip my lips when I go back to New Zealand because no one will understand what I'm talking about. But black swans are things that show up not just in financial markets, but in real markets too. Now, on this spectrum from risk to uncertainty, look at the bottom of this chart. These are the things we teach you in business school. So on the risk to uncertainty spectrum, I've got known, unknown, and unknowable. You know, we're operating, if you're in Silicon Valley, you're operating way over on the right, where there's not just deep uncertainty, but you got the unknowns, or the unknowables. That's your everyday business environment. You know, over on the left, you know, I don't know which market that would be, but, you know, maybe it's, wouldn't even be the Idaho potato market. You'll come up with an example of a stable market. You know, the market for MBA programs is relatively stable, even through pandemics. But look at the tools underneath. All of the stuff that we've taught you, linear programming, NPV, cost-benefit analysis, optimization, utility theory, decision trees, all this stuff. This is all the tools we have are for the world of risk, not for the world of unknown unknowns. And, you know, there's a few things up there, and we'll come back to some of these, you know, the scenario planning. You know, when you've got no idea what the future is, well, let's create scenarios. That's what the military does. Or really, you know, you have to understand complex systems. The reason why there's so much uncertainty is because of complexity. And if you study systems theory, what you'll learn is that, you know, the various components of a system can interact together in ways that produce surprising events. That is the nature of a system, that sometimes you get phenomena that doesn't look like any elements of the system. And so we need a whole bunch of new tools. And we need complexity theory, legitimation theory, and so forth. And quite frankly, I don't think we teach any of those at Haas on the far right there. We used to have the world's best systems thinker, a man by the name of C. West Churchman, that was on our faculty. He overlapped with me. He came on in the 60s and went through to the 80s. But systems theory is out. It's still alive in the engineering schools, but in business schools, it's out. Why is it out? And that is because we've got a lot of professors that want to teach you the tools on the bottom left. So the business school curricula is supply-driven by the faculty we have. Not just the faculty we have, the faculty everybody has. It's not driven by the needs that we have, despite the fact that we claim to be a user-driven and market-sensitive institution. We're not. We don't have the dynamic capabilities that we need at Haas, nor does any other business school have the dynamic capabilities that they need for the future, in my view. But perhaps one will emerge. Next slide, please, Ian. All right, so just to underscore what I've been saying, along comes Jeff Bezos, and he says what I've said in, 15 minutes, he can elegantly say in one sentence. There are decisions that can be made by analysts. Unfortunately, there's a whole other set of decisions that you can't ultimately boil down to a math problem. Now, we would love to boil everything down to a math problem because it's elegant and we give crisp answers. Engineers in particular love crisp answers. Everybody likes a crisp answer, but it's false precision. If you give, that's my story about the auto company that someone on the board wanted to know what the NPV of investing in autonomous vehicles would be. And Mr. Bezos, of course, you think he calculated an NPV before he put Amazon into Amazon Web Services? I doubt it. I don't know for sure. We'll see later that when he did the Kindle, he didn't have an NPV on that. He was just focused on one thing with the Kindle, which is, how can I bring a better experience to my customers? That was his guiding light, not a financial metric, but something better than a financial metric, which is, focusing on what the customer, the user wants, and then trying to figure out how to deliver it to them at an affordable price. Next slide, please. Now, while I'm beating up on quantitative analysis, let me go to the father of the quality movement, American Deming from Columbia. He was an unknown person in the United States. He was pushing the quality movement. The Japanese picked up on Deming's work in the post-war period, and that's why Japanese industry got so good. They became very, very efficient. They developed strong ordinary capabilities. And, if you got strong ordinary capabilities and you follow the leader around the block, it'll work. If you're in a sailboat race and your boat's faster, you just, if you start off behind, you just follow the leading boat and you'll eventually catch them and go ahead of them. But when you've got two boats that are both equally efficient, you're not going to win by following each other around. You're going to have a different strategy. And Deming, who is used as a poster child for quantitative analysis in manufacturing and elsewhere, says, he who would run his business with visible figures alone will soon have neither a business nor visible figures to work with. Isn't that sobering? So yes, it's important to do quantitative analysis, but he who would run his business with visible figures alone will soon have neither a business nor visible figures. Not to say quantitative analysis is not important. It is important. But if you think you're going to get there just with calculations and comparing, strategy A PV with a PV of strategy B, you're not going to win. Next slide, please. So this is one of my first takeaways. I've already hinted at this, but I'm an economist by training, and us economists, everything's about efficiency. So this is really self-flagellation on my own part, but I think given how much economics we drum into other people, it's necessary to say, well, don't worship only at the altar of efficiency or take comfort from high market share. First of all, you can't cost-cut your way to greatness. I'm not saying that aren't times in corporate life when you've got to cut costs. There are. But that's just, getting to a point where you can potentially get the financial resources to invest for a future. You can never cost-cut your way to greatness. You can cost-cut your way to the point where you have an option for greatness, but you can never cost-cut your way to greatness. And too many hedge funds don't know that, and too many CEOs don't know that. And likewise, don't take comfort from high market share. This is, the whole Porter analysis, the 5 forces, the Harvard story is about, and the GE story used to be, I only want to be number one in a market. Well, being number one and having high market share is no longer protection. Overnight in the digital world, number one can become number 3. Now, I'm not saying it's a bad thing to have high market share, but you have to have capability. So focusing on the market is the wrong place to look. It's great to have high capability share, and capabilities are expressed temporarily in market share. But if you don't have the right capabilities, you won't sustain long-term market share. So too much of the analytical apparatus of strategy and of marketing is focused on share, market share. And I think that's a distraction. So here are the 2 big distractions that I want you to take away. One is be aware of efficiency. Beware of the Johnny One Notes, if you will, that focus always on efficiency. And beware of the Johnny One Notes that focus only on market share. I'm not saying they're unimportant. I'm trying to reprioritize. I'm trying to give you a new intellectual framework, a new state of mind as you go into business, and get you focused on the high priority stuff and not on the low priority stuff. Next, please, Ian. And maybe this is a place to stop. No, let me just put this one up and then I'll stop. So, how do you make decisions then? I've just hinted that a lot of the standard textbook stuff doesn't work in the world of deep uncertainty. Despite what we drum into you in the MBA programs, you should ask for a refund if one of your faculty, one of my colleagues, I don't know who it might be, was to overemphasize the decision tools that are suitable for riskless environments or low-risk environments. So you might ask, well, how do you reason? How do you make decisions? And Elon Musk gives us a clue. He said, well, I got to think everything from the bottom up. I've got to reason from first principles. So he's thinking, he's a physicist or mathematician who knows what first principles are. And he goes on to say, people's thinking process is too bound by analogy to prior experience. You have to build up the reasoning from the ground up from first principles. And, in a way, it's a little bit what the lean startup approach is all about, which is you start and you learn and you adjust. And Musk draws this beautiful analogy. He's not the first one to do it. It's the difference between being a cook and a chef. Cooks practice routines, chefs innovate. Cooks have strong ordinary capabilities that chefs innovate. So, my question to you, you want to be a cook or a chef? And, I think too much of the business school curriculum is about teaching you how to cook and not teaching you how to be a chef. And dynamic capabilities, if I may say so, is about how to be a great chef and to keep innovating and keep evolving as the marketplace change, as the ingredients change, as tastes change, and as prices change, and as available foodstuffs change. You've got to keep innovating. So let me pause there. That's been a 15-minute run at least. So Ian, let's see if we've got a question or two from the other end of the tube.
Yeah, we've got three actually. So the first is from Austin. If Austin, you'd like to unmute yourself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Austin Teece, and David Teece's son, and I've taken advantage of that very privileged position to listen in on the course here. I have a very simple question, which I'm sure has a complicated answer. If dynamic capabilities have no cookbook, to extend that analogy, how do you build processes to curate them?
How do you build processes to build for dynamic capabilities? Is that your question?
That is the question.
Yeah, well, the answer is you can't. To some extent, you can in limited circumstances. Think about Intel with its, following down Moore's law. As long as you had Moore's law working for you, you've got a predictable future. How you got from, 10 nanometers to 6 nanometers or whatever, there was a certain plan of action that you could find. There's only one industry that sort of run to the beat of a drum like Moore's law, and that's the semiconductor industry, and now that pathway is over. So, Austin, you asked an extremely good question, and that is you can't use routines. And that's not to say that you can't use principles. That's not to say that you can't be systematic. But the notion that there's a cookbook approach is wrong. So that's why this is hard. And some people might say, well, I'm going to walk out of the course now because I came looking for a formula. I came looking for a cookbook approach. After all, Michael Porter gave his students at Harvard a cookbook. That's what his, competitive strategy book is. It's a laundry list of things to worry about. Actually, it's not a formula, to be honest. I don't have quite that same cookbook because I'm not teaching you how to cook. I'm trying to teach people how to be a chef. So this is why it's hard. This is why it's taken 25 to 30 years for dynamic capabilities to catch on. Because they got, for a while, people were saying it's too enigmatic. But now they realize the reason it's enigmatic is because the world is enigmatic, and that the framework, nevertheless, is a guide. So there's no silver bullet here. In fact, all the related paradigms they're going to talk about later on in the classes, other people trying to feed you silver bullets, and everybody looking for a silver bullet, and there's no one silver bullet. There is, I don't know what the analogy is, one of those guns that fire hundreds of silver bullets at once, but in an orderly fashion. That's more the analogy of how you win with dynamic capabilities. So we have actually one more quote from Steve Jobs. Let's just go to the next slide, Ian, to see if it's a Steve Jobs quote. If it is, no, okay, one more. No, if you back up to where we were, we'll eventually get to a quote from Steve Jobs where he says, we don't really have routines for doing creative work. We'll come to that. There's two other hands that were up, so let's take the other two questions, please.
So first, from Jeff, can you speak to dynamic capabilities and wicked problems and how they're connected?
Yes. Well, I'm glad you've heard of the term wicked problems. This is what dynamic capability is about. Wicked problems are ones that result from deep complexity and where the answer comes only from interdisciplinary analysis. The answers in the dynamic capabilities world likewise come from an interdisciplinary process. By the time we're done with this course, we will have touched on not just strategy questions. We will have touched on marketing questions. We will have touched on operations management questions. We will have touched on human resource questions. We will have touched on corporate culture questions. We will have touched on decision making. We will have touched on psychology. We will have touched on, most everything that's out there in the social sciences and most every field of business. And it's really through the competitive advantage, if you will. Building long-term sustainable competitive advantage is a wicked problem. Thank you for the question, because I finally got to the answer that I think you were seeking, and I should have given you earlier. We are looking at a wicked problem, which is building competitive advantage. So there's a nice little literature out there for 20, 30 years on wicked problems, looking mainly at the public sector. But this is the wickedest problem in the private sector. And you've given me an idea, and it's a good title for a future paper. Whoever it is that asked me the question, if you know something about it, email me, and maybe we can do something here. Next question,
all right,
please.
Great. So we have one from Regina, which is a lot of startups mention first principles. Can you share an example of first principles?
Well, first principles, if you think of lean startup, it's almost like, if in doubt, do. Why does that make sense? If in doubt, do, because the only way you learn is by getting started, and then pivot. You diagnose what the circumstances are, you figure out how you change, and then pivot. That's kind of the set of principles that you can use. And as you're doing the course here, you may, it'd be a great term paper here is, what are the set of principles that you can distill from dynamic capability? They're sprinkled all through the literature, including my own, but I haven't actually put them together in one place. And that would be a nice little exercise. But there are some no-nos. I've already given you two big no-nos. One no-no is don't focus just on efficiency. Another big no-no is don't focus just on market share. Another big no-no is don't use NPV and the tools for markets or environments of certainty and predictability or of risk where you can put a probability on it. That's a no-no. So together by the end of the class, let's make this an exercise, and we'll come up with the 20 no-nos for dynamic capabilities and maybe 30 yeses, and see what it looks like.
I look forward to it. Good. Next, let's see, from Hemant, if that's how you say your name.
Yes, you got it. You got it, Ian. Thank you so much. Hello, Professor Teece. My name is Hemant. I work in business development at Amazon. I had the privilege of working with the Berkeley Research Group, Kevin Hamilton from your team, and some few other folks very recently. I have a quick question around, much like ordinary capabilities, do dynamic capabilities can also cancel each other out as a point of differentiator for firms?
Where you mean if I've got dynamic capabilities and you've got dynamic capabilities and we're head-to-head competitors, does it cancel each other out?
That is correct.
Kind of, yes. I mean, Google's got strong dynamic capabilities. Amazon does. Apple does. Netflix does. So you guys are all competing. You know, the rest of the world thinks there's no competition in big tech. When I look at it through the lens of dynamic capabilities, so long as you've got strong dynamic capabilities, there is going to be strong competition. When there's weak competition is when you got somebody with strong, when you got a bunch of companies with weak dynamic capabilities competing, or if you have one with strong dynamic capabilities and the other with weak, you know, the one with weak will get eliminated pretty quickly. But this is, you're leading towards actually a very important public policy question by posing the question you did. And that is the people in Washington and Brussels that are trying to rein in big tech, they don't understand that competition is not confined to swim lanes. You know, Amazon's not over here in books and online, and Apple over here in something different. There's many points of overlap, and you've got big databases, big lakes of customer data that you're using, and you're competing vigorously against each other, even if it's not, you know, head on. It's from an oblique angles and complementary angles. The whole nature of competition is different. The textbooks are usually 20 to 30 years behind. So I'm glad you put that question out there. And what it means, you know, Andy Grove, who is a Berkeley grad, by the way, is CEO of Intel for many years, wrote this book, Only the Paranoid Survive. And when you've all got strong dynamic capabilities, and you're going to have high market shares, like Amazon's got a high market share in what it's doing head on, and Apple's got a high market share, well, actually not such high in iPhones, but in, you know, the app stores, and Google's got a high market share in search. Doesn't mean a damn thing. Doesn't mean a damn thing anymore. And yet, you know, the Elizabeth Warrens of the world that think they understand competition draw the analogy with the railroads, and they think it's just like the railroads of the 1890s. You know, she's brain dead. She's from Harvard, so what do you expect? But she doesn't understand competition. Even if she was from Harvard and she lived in Silicon Valley, she wouldn't say those things. She would know they're wrong. But our job is to, you know, policy comes from people's basic understanding of things. People's basic understanding of things comes from textbooks. The textbooks are not faithful. Textbooks about competition, whether they're strategy books or whether they're antitrust books, don't understand competition as it is. That's why I'm so fired up about this. I'm not only trying to create a framework to help managers, I'm trying to create a framework to help policymakers. And indeed, I'm talking to the people in Brussels and in Washington on these questions. And, you know, they're pricking up their ears. They know there's some sense here, but the problem is they want everything worked out down to the last detail. They want to tell, well, all right, well, maybe this is true, then tell me how I make my decisions differently. Well, everyone's looking for a cookbook. Everyone wants a simple answer to a complex problem. The question was posed earlier about wicked problems. Wicked problems don't have simple answers. Wicked problems have complex answers. And any simple answer to a complex question or to a complex question is likely to be wrong. Anyway, good question. And we'll come back to those. We'll come back to those themes. Thank you. You're fantastic questions. You're really getting some of the essence of this thing out on the table early on in the very first class. Is there another question there, Ian?
Yes, we have one more, and then we can go into our break from about 7:30 to 8. And it's from Haida. I hope I'm saying that correctly. And it's whether the DC approach can be applied at the team level within a firm, and if so, how would that approach be different?
Yes. Well, look, yes and no. Look, if the top management team, well, let's say team, if we're talking the top management team, yes, that's in my view where dynamic capabilities lives. I mean, the culture of the organization matters, but if the top management team does not have this stuff in their blood and in their brain, you know, the company has got a short half-life. But if you're a team in the middle of an organization with a top management team that doesn't get it, you got a hard job. You've got a better shot if you're a team. That's always true. But you've got to focus your guns, if you're in the middle, on getting the guys at the top. If you're at the top, that's good news. If you're at the bottom, well, you know, you have the same frustrations that I referred to earlier. So we're figuring out how to, you know, get the leadership of the organization onto the right page is very, very important. And it's not just one. I mean, it's not just Steve Jobs. It's not just Jeff Bezos, and it's not just Elon Musk. If you look, there's always teams of good people around them. And, you know, some of those guys are a little bit narcissistic and don't give full credit to the rest of the team, but there's always a team there. But there also has to be a team leader. And a team leader has got to be good. And Steve Jobs is very clear about this. It's not just about saying yes. It's not about what you say yes to. It's actually just as much about what you say no to. That's what saved Apple when Steve Jobs came back. It was not so much what he did, it's what he didn't do. He shut down a lot of dead-end projects that they had going that were all cool, that weren't going to go anywhere. All right, so let's take our break, and I'll get to charge my AirPods here so that we can continue in 10 minutes at, or is it a 15-minute break, Ian? It's a 15-minute break, so we'll resume at...
Let's see. So we build 30 minutes, but we could actually shorten it and then end a bit earlier. I mean, we could say do 15 minutes and then plan to end at about 9 p.m.
Oh, I think that's a great idea. So let's take a 15-minute break, and we'll end at 9 so that you'll have a chance to do whatever it is you need to do. Thank you so much, okay. And I'm going to leave. I'm going to stay on here. If anyone wants to, Ian, well, I'll shut down. Sorry, I'll shut down. I'll be back in 15.
Yeah, that's fine. So yes, we'll reconvene at about 7:45. And yes, if you have further questions, you can put them through into chat. Okay. See you again shortly.